In today's episode, I bring to you a guest who I know from years back when I went to Bible school. We went to the same Bible school together. He was the younger brother of one of my dearest friends while I was there. And he actually just wrote a book called Learning to See. It's a top bestseller on Amazon, and it is for photographers. He is a world-class photographer, celebrity photographer. He has a really cool story. And he's built a multi-million-dollar business, just profound business savvy ideas that God has given him. But he shares his story in this episode of how he had a whole different plan for his life. And there was a tragic accident that he knew destroyed his ability to fulfill those dreams, and how the Lord pivoted him into the dreams he didn't even know he had for his life. It is an exciting, moving, powerful, touching story. So you're not going to want to miss it. And you're not going to want to miss his life hack at the very end. It's going to make you giggle. All right, let's jump in.
Hi, you're listening to Java with Jen with your host, Jenna Lee Samuel. On this show, I bring the simplicity of hearing God's voice into everyday life in a no-nonsense, authentic, and super practical way. With coffee in hand and real life in our faces, let's do this.
Hey, it's Jen. Have you ever listened to one of the episodes and thought to yourself, oh, I wish I could leave a response to that, or I wish I could leave feedback or ask a question? Did you know there's actually a way to do that in Spotify now? I know, it's super cool. So if you head over to Spotify and search for Java with Jen podcast or Java with Jen Hearing God's Voice for Everyday Life, you may have to search all of it. And then you go and check out my most recent episodes. There are polls and Q&A options that you can weigh in on, and I can connect with you that way over here on this platform. I usually use Instagram to connect with you guys, but now with this feature from Spotify, it's a super cool way to engage with the content of each episode and talk to me directly. I'm looking forward to hearing from you guys. So go head over to my latest episodes on Spotify, and let's do that right now. Thanks so much for joining me today at Java with Jen. Today's guest is actually a friend of mine from years back who recently wrote a book that has a riveting story behind it and will also be a great resource for any of you who are aspiring or current photographers. But my guest, David Molnar, is a celebrity and advertising photographer, a believer, and a family man. His work has been seen on millions of Pepsi cans in People magazine, on American Idol, and in the New York Times. His clients include Google, Pepsi, and Sony, among many others. He feels so blessed to be realizing his dreams and is now focusing on being a photography mentor with his business. He's helping tens of thousands of photographers pursue their dreams by creating world-class photo education, inspiration, and resources. Now, I wanted to have David on. That's a very full bio. David, thank you for coming to this show.
Yeah. Thanks for reading all of that. I was like, wow, I need to have a condensed version of this because that's kind of long. But yeah, thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. I know it's hard to capture everything that we end up doing in our lives in a short, concise way. But so you guys are probably thinking like, why are we having a photographer on Java with Jen? So here's the deal. I met David way back in Bible school, right after college. His sister was my accountability partner. She was in my wedding. And so that's kind of how I met David. But he had recently posted on Facebook that he'd written a book and was looking for a way to get it in front of people. And me knowing that David is a believer, and I know God was woven into this story. And so I wanted to find out more of his backstory. And then the more I talked with him and learned about how his life trajectory changed and how he walked that out, I was like, this is inspirational for all of my listeners. So that is really why I'm bringing David to you today. So David, go ahead and tell us a little bit about your book, and then why don't you just dive into how you got to where you are today and the role that the Lord played in all of that.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me again. I'm happy to share this story and a little bit about the story of this book and all that stuff. The book is called Learning to See. It's specifically a book for photographers or anyone who's interested in photography, whether they are an Instagram husband and are forced to be the photographer, or if someone wants to, pursue it as a way for, just passion or the therapy of photography. Photography played a big role in some therapy at a crucial time in my life. We can get into that in a little bit. But the subtitle for the book is A Photographer's Guide from Zero to Your First Paid Gigs. And the goal for that is that it would help anyone who's interested in photography pursue their dream. So whether it's for passion or for profit or just to make your wife happy taking pictures of her, you know?
Because that's the thing these days. It really is.
It is the amount of poor Instagram husbands that I see around. I live in a beach town, and there's always like, some girl that wants her boyfriend or whatever to take a picture of them. So
that's great.
Pretty fun.
So now you shared with me when we talked a number of weeks ago about the fact that you didn't start out aspiring to be a photographer, but you felt called in a very different direction. And there was some kind of tragic things that happened that redirected the course of your life. So why don't you dive into that a little bit?
That's right. When I was 18 years old, I was a senior in high school. Mm-hmm. I had just gotten my pilot's license a month before. I was on my way to being a professional airline pilot. That was the goal. I was going to work for American Airlines or something, and, be an airline pilot. And that was kind of my dream, to travel around and to do that sort of thing. And I was also an undefeated wrestler. And that was kind of my ticket to get college scholarships, to get out of the small town, to pay for college, because my family didn't have a ton of money. And I knew I was either going to have to take out massive school loans or, do everything I could to get a college scholarship. And on December 24th, so Christmas Eve, I think the year was 2002. Yeah, that makes sense. I got into a head-on collision where each of us were going over 60 miles per hour. Wow. So it's kind of like hitting a brick wall at 120 miles per hour. I didn't know what happened. I didn't know what happened. I didn't know how it happened. And I woke up in the hospital with the nurses telling me it wasn't my fault. Wow. And so at that moment, I looked down and I saw this massive, like my knee is just split open and it doesn't work. Oh. My other knee is like in a lot of pain. My ankle is, as black as my phone case right here. Wow. And my whole body ached. And I just knew that I was not ever going to wrestle again. And so the interesting thing was I was 2 months into my undefeated year of, being a wrestler of my senior year in high school. And the second 2 months were the final, after Christmas was the next, the final 2 months. And I watched the rest of my senior year of high school of the wrestling season from a wheelchair. And it was at this moment that I realized like all my dreams are like shifting, like everything that I've been working my butt off for the last 4 years is not going to come to fruition. I'm not going to get the college scholarships. I'm not going to win the state championship like I was aspiring to do. And just like all of my dreams came to a crashing halt on that day, Christmas Eve. What a great Christmas present.
Yeah, no kidding.
And honestly, I was pretty broken, and I didn't know what to do. And it was really this moment when I was so mad, so frustrated, so heartbroken at this point in life. But I was thankful for my life because there was people saying I shouldn't be alive. Wow. There was this moment, we'll call it about a year prior to the accident, where there was a missionary lady that my parents supported over the course of the years. And she was visiting town for whatever reason. And she dropped by in the most disgusting looking car I'd ever seen in my life. It was this old mustard yellow, rusted Volvo station wagon. It was despicable looking. And she walked in the house and was talking to my parents. And she said, "I feel like God is telling me to give your son, David, my car." And I'm like,
thanks.
I'm just thinking, you're just trying to get rid of this thing so someone else can so you can beg for a new car, like missions and stuff like, I saw people taking advantage of people anyways. And so I'm like, whatever. And my parents were like, okay, we need an extra car. And they sent the Nissan Sentra, this little, small sedan with Melody, your friend, my older sister, off to Texas. And I got stuck with the mustard yellow 1981 Volvo station wagon. This car could buy beer. I couldn't. I was only 18, so I couldn't buy beer, right? Or actually, I was 17 at the time. And then what's interesting is the Volvo station wagon is one of the safest cars in the world. It's known to hold up in crazy things. If I had been driving the Nissan Sentra that I was currently driving prior to this lady giving us this disgusting looking car, I would not be talking to you today.
Wow.
It was at that point, maybe a little later, I remembered like this lady said God told her to give me that car.
Yeah.
I think that car saved my life.
Wow. Yeah.
But I was heartbroken, and I watched I watched the guy that I beat in high school. Now, we're not talking about WWF wrestling. We're talking about actual competitive wrestling, like it's a sport for real. And I watched the guy that I beat win the state championship. And that was heartbreaking to me.
Yeah.
I'm like learning to walk and all these different things. So I ended up taking a year off and going to the Bible school that you talked about. And then in that school, in that internship, it was a great business model because we paid to be there and work for them, which was
right.
It's a great business model. I need to figure out how to do that in my own business. But it was an amazing year. Met a lot of amazing people like yourself. And during that year, I got really encouraged to pursue a hobby of mine, which was photography. And during that year, there's a lot of things that happened. But during that year, I got really encouraged, and I thought to myself, maybe I should pivot from, my dream of being an airline pilot, and maybe I should pursue this crazy artistic profession of photography instead. But the interesting thing is I didn't think you could make a living at it. I didn't think it was possible to make six figures being a photographer. It seemed like all the photographers that I knew were broke or struggling, or, were doing it part-time or as a passion thing. But I remember thinking at the time, like, if anyone can figure it out, I have enough like tenacity. And like when I remember there was this businessman in my hometown that said, like, you want to be a photographer? He's like, that's a tough lifestyle. Like, that's a tough, like, he kind of, this is this multimillionaire guy. And he wasn't trying to be rude or disrespectful or even discouraging. He was kind of saying, like, trying to be a professional photographer is like, you're probably going to be struggling and broke for the rest of your life. He's like, you might want to consider a real profession, like being a realtor or a banker or something like that. And I just remember thinking, like, challenge accepted.
Right.
Like, I actually was just thinking, I need to call that guy and just kind of tell him. I remember him saying that like 20 years ago, and it kind of lit a fire under my butt to be like, I'll prove you wrong,
Right.
even though he was being nice, he wasn't being spiteful about it. So
That's
yeah, that
amazing.
was kind of that was the transition for me, just to like, even just deciding to pursue a path in photography.
Now, you had shared with me that you started pursuing photography, but then you ended up kind of floundering and feeling a little lost in it. And the Lord directed your steps at a pivotal time before you got married. So why don't you go into that?
After I spent a year, interning with this nonprofit where we met, I followed this girl that I liked to Nashville, and we were engaged to be married. And she was involved in the music industry. And when I moved to Nashville, I got the chance to intern and assist other photographers. And when I was on those shoots, I got exposed to a level of photography that I wasn't aware of. I was, cleaning toilets, carrying sandbags, setting up lights, setting up backgrounds, doing whatever, you name it, on the sets of like, photo shoots for Taylor Swift or for Carrie Underwood or all of these different, people. And there would be, sometimes 20 people on set to take a picture of one person. It was a ridiculous amount of setup, a ridiculous amount of work, and a ridiculous amount of effort that would go into it. I mean, the makeup artist would have an assistant or two to help carry the makeup bags,
Wow.
Then there'd also be a separate hairstylist. And then I was maybe like on this first shoot that I got thrown onto, I was the fourth assistant. So that means there was 3 other assistants to the photographer. And then there was me,
Wow.
and I got exposed to this whole like level of photography that I was like, wow, great, incredible photos that are on magazine covers and album covers and advertising campaigns. These photos are not accidentally shot in the perfect light with someone who has a great hair day, right? These are incredibly intentionally crafted stories that are images that are a single image in the end, And I realized at that time, like, holy crap, I know nothing. Because I had shot some concerts for this nonprofit and like had some cool early wins that I was thinking I was hot stuff. And I realized, like, wow, I know nothing. This is it. This is who I want to be. I want to shoot album covers and advertising campaigns. And I realized, like, I had no idea like how to even come close to the level of photography that these photographers were creating. So during the time that I was engaged, I took a break from my assisting, lifestyle of assisting other photographers. And I went on this 2-month road trip around Mexico. I'm engaged to be married to my wife, Tammy, and we're planning a wedding in my hometown. And there's lots of details left. And I said, hey, babe, I'm going to take a 2-month road trip, like guys trip, just the two of, like just me and my buddy. Like, you're going to stay here and work full time. I know I don't really have a job and I don't really have any money, but any money that I do have, I'm going to spend it all on this trip and then put a bunch of money on a credit card, and go leave for 2 months while you plan the wedding, the rest of the wedding's details. Is that cool? Like, you can plan it by yourself in my hometown where no one, like, and there's so many people that are like,
you're married right now.
Oh my gosh. There's so many people like, are you sure you want to marry this immature Jack? Like, they're like, this kid is not like, I don't know, you might want to reconsider this. And I don't know. It was a little rocky there. She barely hung on. So I went on this trip, and it was an amazing, like, coming of age, journey. Like, it was a man trip, like a wild at heart, John Eldridge type thing that I needed to do. And was it a wise decision? Like, not necessarily. Did it have a good outcome? Like, yes, I think so. I think it was worth it. But there was this moment about a month in when I've already like depleted all my savings and probably went a couple $1,000s into debt just to pay for gas and, all the expenses on this trip. Like halfway through this 2-month trip, by the way. And I'm somewhere in mainland Mexico. We drove all the way from Nashville to San Diego, and then all the way south down Baja California, camped, surfed every day, spearfished for dinner, and ate cheap tacos, like while we were traveling and stuff. So we took an 18-hour ferry ride across from La Paz to Mazatlan on the mainland, and then started heading south. Somewhere, I don't remember where, on the beach in mainland Mexico, not a soul, not another human soul in sight. The gravity of my situation started hitting me, and I'm like, I have no money. I'm engaged to be married. I spared the details, but I had several mortgages and no job, and only my my wife with a salary that wasn't really that substantial at the time. Maybe to a 20 or 21-year-old kid, it sounded interesting to me, but it wasn't really that substantial at the time. And I remember thinking and like wrestling with God and thinking to myself, like, what the heck am I going to do? How am I going to support my family? I mean, it was just me and my fiance at the time, but I'm thinking, like, how am I going to support my family when I get home? How am I going to pay all these bills? And I wanted to shoot these album covers, this new level of photography that I had gotten exposed to. And I remember God telling me on the beach, like, I want you to shoot weddings. And it was like as clear and as audible as I've ever heard. And there's nothing wrong with wedding photography. But the issue is I had a dream. Yeah. Okay, I had this new dream of pursuing this level of photography that you see in the magazine covers and album covers and everything like that. And I didn't understand how to do it, but I understood that there is a whole other level that I need to learn and I need to pursue. The other thing is I was listening to a lot of self-help books, a lot of, preachers and teachers, and reading books like Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, listening to The Strangest Secret by Earl Nightingale, and all these things. And they all basically said, like, in order to be great, you need to have a definiteness of purpose to pursue a worthy goal. Okay. A definiteness of purpose. You have to be 190% all in on a specific goal in order to achieve greatness. And my mom and dad told me when I was a kid that I was destined for great things and that God had a plan for my life and that I could do anything that I felt called to do. And I naively or wisely or something believed them. So when God's telling me to pursue weddings, I'm thinking like, oh, like this is not the thing that I want to pour my whole heart into and the rest of my life into shooting weddings. And I'm wrestling with God at this point. Like, this is like probably the most audible I've ever heard God. It wasn't out loud, it was inside. But the point is like as clear as I've ever heard God. And he is like, yes, these teachings and these preachers and these, mentors that you're listening to or reading are right. You do need to have a definiteness of purpose, and you do need to give it 190% and go all in on whatever it is that you're pursuing in order to be great. But what you're not realizing is that you can pursue this for a season of your life, not the rest of your life.
Mm.
And I felt like God was asking me, give me 5 years and pursue wedding photography with everything you have. And I will, fulfill dreams that you don't even know that you have. Okay. And I'm like, kind of like crying on the beach, like, okay, I'll do it, but I still didn't have any, prospects to shoot wedding photography. I hadn't shot a real wedding before. I had like tagged along on some other ones, but I'd never gotten paid, like never gotten hired to officially shoot a wedding. And I was like, but I still don't have any weddings booked. And I felt like I was like, I'll work it out for you. Don't stress, like just be faithful.
Mm-hmm.
So shortly after that, Sarah, her name is now Peed. She went to Teen Mania, the Bible school that we went to a long time ago as well. And she contacted me like, hey, would you shoot my wedding? And I was like, yeah, I'll shoot it, like, great. And it was one of those things like, this is my opportunity. Like, this is my shot, and this is that her wedding was June 24th, 2006. Mm-hmm. So I go home from Mexico, I get married on May 6th. And then a month and a half later, we shoot this wedding. My wife and I drive from Nashville to somewhere in Virginia, I forget, somewhere like outskirts, like Podunk, Virginia, somewhere. And we drive all night, get 3 or 4 hours in a hotel room, like get to the hotel room like 2 or 3 a.m., sleep for a few hours, get up at 8 a.m. and like go shoot this wedding. I mean, I poured my heart into this, like everything possible into preparing to be a wedding photographer. I was looking at magazines and I was tearing out like, okay, that's a good pose. And this is a good lighting situation. Didn't know what I was doing, but I did everything I could. I read a book on wedding photography. I did all these things that like everything I could possibly do to prepare. I show up with a folder, and as we're shooting her wedding, pouring 190% into it, I'm like getting these tear sheets from the magazines out and be like, no, like holding it up in front of my face and then like tweak your arm this way, like using the magazine cutouts as like my example. And like, I mean, they were gracious enough to not question, I was probably trying to sneak it, but it was pretty obvious of like, no, pose this way. Right. Anyways, long story short, like we knocked it out of the park. My wife wasn't shooting with me, but she was logistics and all that stuff. And we're, a month into being married. So she was very gracious to go on this adventure with me. And they ended up loving the pictures. To this day, I still think they're, considering all things considered, I think they're great photos. And we ended up booking, I forget the exact math, but I think it was like 7 other weddings before the end of the year. And that first one is in June. So we're already halfway through the year. Wow. So then it started paying our bills and like matching my wife's salary just for the weddings that we shot the second half of the year. And then we started traveling, like that same year, people started flying us to places and we're like, wow, this is cool. Like, and then by the next year we're flying to, Malibu, California and Miami, Florida and New York. And someone flew us to Greece, to the island of Crete. And we got to shoot a wedding, in the tropical waters of Crete in August.
Yes,
and
please.
By the way, and paid us more than we had, like about 4 times what we had charged for that very first wedding. Wow. So it was one of those things where it was like, I was like, holy crap, God, like you are really fulfilling promises. And remember, I wanted to be an airline pilot. It was because I wanted to travel. And I had like my perception of weddings were, you're going to get paid $400 or $500, which sounds like a lot, but not when you consider the months of prep time. The 3 weeks of editing after the fact. You're like, it's not like, if it was $500 for one day of work, sure, it sounds good, but it's not. It's months of work. Okay. Right. So, and by that estimation, I would have to shoot 60 weddings a year to make $30,000.
Oh, like 5 a month. That's a lot.
There's only 52 weekends a year. So it was like every weekend, and some weekends you're gonna have to double. Here's my point. God blessed us, and it became this incredible opportunity. And for years and years, like we got to shoot weddings. I want to also mention one other thing. When I was wrestling with God on the beach in Mexico, I forgot to add this detail. I was walking along the beach, and this was like February or March on the Pacific coast of Mexico. And I see these like thousands and thousands of like blue whales or humpback whales, I forget which type. It was just this crazy phenomenon, apparently, where they like come that time of year to like either have their babies or nurse their young or whatever. there was a ridiculous amount of these whales, and like, this amazing water was spouting up from, like from their blowholes, and they were coming in really close to the shore, to almost like a bear would scratch his back on a tree. They were like rubbing their bellies in the sand, and it was just like one of the most majestic things that like I've ever seen. And I was watching this, taking a watching this while I was arguing with God, that time when he told me to shoot weddings.
Wow.
Okay, so fast forward a few years later, my wife is able to quit her job. We've traveled the world and shot weddings in Switzerland multiple times, like I said, and like in Malibu and Canada multiple times, like other exotic destinations. We were truly a husband and wife wedding photography team. My wife started shooting photos as well, and we ended up having like a blast, paying off all of our debt. I remember us having about $40,000 of crap debt, not including the multiple mortgages, and like being able to support our lifestyle. We started making six figures in that second year of shooting weddings. And not that it's all about money, but like we needed to make money to survive. And it was like God provided all that. Okay.
Wow.
So then my wife exits her job, which she loved, but like it was time for her to exit her job and for us to go, full time as like, in the photography business. And we take a 2-month sabbatical on the island of Oahu in Hawaii. Okay. And we're there, and I do this photo shoot while I'm there that helps pay for the thing. It was a cool opportunity. And then we take some downtime and we read books on the beach, and it was this magical time. And I remember looking at the Pacific Ocean one day as we're sightseeing, and I saw all these whales, and I was like, man, this is crazy. And there's like all these whales, and like it's different. It's a different environment, completely different place, and then all these like, those water spouting up from the whales. And I just thought, man, that's so magical and majestic. Like the last time I saw, like this many whales together, it's so bizarre, was in Mexico. And holy crap, that was 5 years ago this month. I'm getting goosebumps right now. Like it was that moment where I was like, oh my gosh, it's been 5 years. God told me to commit 5 years to this, and he would bless my socks off and fulfill dreams that I didn't even know that I had. And I'm just like, I'm still got goosebumps all over. Every time I think about this story, it's mesmerizing to me. And I felt like God in that moment told me 5 years to the month later, like your time is up. You can transition out of shooting weddings and start pursuing your dream of photographing album covers and advertising campaigns.
Wow.
And it was just like, my wife, we had paid off our debt. We had gotten to travel the world, had a lot of fun. We earned money, had built up my arsenal of photography equipment, had learned a lot of things, done a lot of test shoots during this time. And like things are like starting to happen on the commercial side, but I felt like a switch to where like you can pursue commercial photography now. So then, I mean, it was just this mesmerizing thing of like, holy crap, I was faithful and God's blessed it,
Wow.
And then we got the opportunity to photograph the band Skillet. And, after years and years of working my butt off and knowing this band, because my wife worked in the management side of this, they gave me a shot to photograph the band Skillet. And, I'd been practicing for years and building up all these things. And like I said, many years prior to that, I was, getting coffee and cleaning toilets in these photo studios. And a lot of these record label execs and all these things are there in these shoots, but I'm the little assistant and they don't pay attention to me. Okay.
Right.
So I get the opportunity to photograph the band Skillet, just like I did with that wedding, with Sarah's wedding. I worked my butt off on it, and I gave it everything I possibly could. And the album went on to sell like 2 million copies.
Wow.
It was their best-selling album of all time. And all of a sudden, the Nashville music industry knew my name.
Wow.
And then the phone started ringing off the hook. And then it was, let's photograph Newsboys and Mercy Me and Matthew West and all these other people, and shooting album covers for all these different types of people. And it was, it was as if I had arrived overnight, and I'm re-meeting these, the A&R guy at the record label, like, hey, I'm David. Nice to meet you. He's like, yeah, it's so great to meet you. I've heard good things about you in the last few months. I'm like, cool. Yeah. We met 4 years ago and I cleaned the toilet right after you. You know what I mean? Like, I don't tell them that, but that's what I'm thinking. I'm like, yeah, right. I got you coffee. You like almond milk. Like I remember that, but they don't. And I was not making them feel bad. I just like reintroduced myself. I'm like, yeah, David, nice to meet you. So it's interesting though, is like, being faithful and, pursuing the path that God had for me. I was able to really like achieve my dream. But
Wow.
there was this pivot, there was this time where I had to like essentially pay my dues and be faithful during that time.
Yeah, absolutely. So, wow, you guys, isn't his story just so moving and so inspirational? There's some things I want to pull out from his story that I feel like will encourage you. If you think through his journey, so many of us have experienced the same thing where we had our eyes set on something, our goals set on this big dream, and somehow, some way, it unravels. Does that mean our eyes were set on the wrong thing? I don't know that that does. I think as we walk through life, I don't think that we should think through the perspective of right and wrong so much as options. Like, he could pursue anything he wants to. Like, God's not a puppeteer that just pulls the strings and we just do the things and we have no say in it. We see throughout scripture that God has a relationship with us where we can even change God's mind. But there are still times where we'll have our heart set on something and it just doesn't work out that way. And that's just life. I don't think that comes down to right or wrong, God's plan, not God's plan, whatever. That's just sometimes how things play out. And sometimes that's the result of decisions that we make that cause us to miss an opportunity or get disqualified from something or whatever. But God is so big and he's so good at taking situations, using them for our good. God's plan B is never just second best. God is so big that his plan B can often be better than plan A. And so even when David was looking at pursuing piloting and pursuing wrestling, he could have had a great life doing those things. You know what I'm saying? But what happened. And so what became important was how he pivoted and allowed the Lord to shift him. Now, I think it's pretty instrumental that when he decided to kind of just pull away and heal and kind of nurture his heart, he didn't go and like develop some bad coping techniques and bad habits to do that. He actually went and invested into himself and into his relationship with God, which I think is one key that's really important. When we're walking through hard times, disillusioned times, or having to grieve the loss of something, it's actually really important that you take time to pour the Word of God back into you, however that looks, whether it's time at church or going through a Bible course or going through just a Bible study or just walking with a friend through a Bible book, or I don't know, whatever it looks like. Making sure that you're pouring truth into your heart, because ultimately we want to walk in partnership with what God wants to do in our life, right? And it is possible in those moments of trauma, of hurt, of disappointment, the enemy, and not to make it more dramatic than it needs to be, but the enemy is watching and waiting for opportunities to derail and disrupt our lives. That should not introduce fear, but simply a shrewd wisdom that we want to be strategic in those moments. We want to be intentional. Just simply getting the word in and being surrounded by believers and people who are going to encourage you, pray for you, walk with you is huge in those times. And so one that was super smart and was actually the time where the Lord pivoted him and gave him the idea, hey, maybe I should pursue photography. And ironically is also where the first doors of photography were opened to him. So I think that's interesting and worth noting for sure. And then if you notice throughout his story, there did come a point, just like with Abraham and so many other people, that even with the photography, he still had to lay that dream down also. So not only did he have to lay down the dream of wrestling and piloting, which, I mean, I don't think he had to lay down piloting. He just chose to kind of pivot. He had to lay down the road of photography that he wanted to pursue. And so many times when we feel the Lord asking us to lay something down, we fight him on it because we feel like, or we believe the lie that God's taking something from us. But in reality, God knows what's best. He knows the things that we're going to need. He knows the tools that we're going to need to do what we need to do successfully. And he was asking David to trust him, without laying out the whole plan. We're not entitled to an explanation. God just says, I need you to trust me. Because the beautiful thing is, sometimes if he's to give us the whole plan and the whole explanation, we get our hands all in the mess, we screw it all up, we try to decide what's best, and that's just human nature, and God knows that. And so he's like, hey, why don't you just trust me? And he'll put a path in front of you and ask you to just be faithful on that path. And so that's the second thing I want to point out, is that David was faithful with what the Lord asked him to do, even though it was not something that thrilled him. In his mind, in his natural explanations, he didn't see, and even the people around him couldn't see, how that was going to be a really fruitful path. But he had a word from the Lord, and the Lord said, give me 5 years and go all in. And that's where the faithfulness was. He went all in. He didn't half-heart it. He didn't just, casually say, oh, I'll just give it a try. No, he went all in as though it were the thing that was central to his heart. And it was his all-in attitude that actually opened those doors. I think the Lord blessed the humility that it took for him to embrace a plan that was not his original plan, or David's original plan. And he chose to go all in, which was just an obedient spirit. The Bible says that God gives grace to the humble, which means divine opportunity, divine empowerment, but he opposes the proud. If David had had an attitude, then the Lord would have just kept him looping on this situation over and over until he could have humility. Praise God for David's sake. He chose humility, and he chose to embrace what God wanted to do with his story and trust the Lord. And so he didn't lose a bunch of time. And so I feel like it's one thing that I've learned in walking through some hard seasons where I felt like I couldn't trust God. And it was never 100%, didn't feel like I could trust God, because I still found that my instinct was to still go to the Lord for direction. But emotionally, there was some wounds and disappointments that I knew there was walls I had put up just subconsciously in my heart towards the Lord. And that does sometimes make it hard after hardship to trust, but it is a decision. It is a choice. And I look back and I think I'm so glad that even though I wrestled through the emotions of choosing to trust, that my actions were that I still trusted. And I was honest with the Lord, processed things, asked all the hard questions, and he was so kind to meet me where I was, bring confirmation, bring reassurance, bring the things I needed to continue walking in trusting him. But even when you wrestle with trusting the Lord, that ultimately when we lay our plans aside and walk with him, knowing his plan that is in play, he sees so much more than we do, then God can turn things in our favor in ways that we never could. And, it's same as with our kids. Hey, buddy, you don't know everything that I manage as the runner of this home. You don't know all the adult decisions I have to make, all the finances I have to consider, all the adults my decisions impact, all the you kids my decisions impact, the future things. You don't know all of this, but I need you to simply obey when I say do this. And that's really where the Lord is. He has all the factors in play. He knows all the things. And he's like, I'm not going to burden you with all that knowledge. I just need you to trust me. And so if you find yourself in a difficult season where you feel like a dream has died, or something you were aspiring to just suddenly got pulled out of your hands, do not lose hope, because as we saw in David's story, which he didn't mention, but he runs a multi-million-dollar business now, and it's huge. And the Lord gave him some unique ideas so that just being a photographer was not his sole income, but he had some really great business ideas that allowed him to expand to the level that he has. And that's all just because I believe he continued to walk in response to the Holy Spirit, walk in humility, and walk in faithfulness. So let me encourage you guys with those principles. Now, unfortunately, we lost the recording of where he shared his life hack, but I'm going to share it with you guys. It's pretty funny, and you're going to laugh that this life hack is coming out of my mouth, if you guys know me at all. But, it's going to apply for some people, and it's pretty brilliant and just makes you chuckle. So don't go anywhere. We've got his life hack coming right up. Okay, so David's life hack was this. Listen, he figured out a long time ago, especially as he was building his business, he said it's been about 10 years that he's been implementing this, and I can verify it is true. He decided that when he was an early photographer on the scenes with all these famous celebrity people, he was trying to be really fun and funky and cool with his clothes, kind of have a real artistic vibe, and would try to always wear something unique and stuff. And he realized that it was just exhausting for him. He just didn't want to exert the energy to figure out how to dress the part. And so he decided, you know what? He kept finding himself going back to the same blue V-neck t-shirt that he loved with khaki shorts and sandals. And that was his favorite combo to wear when he would get home. And he was like, you know what? Why don't I just wear this all the time? Why don't I just wear it all the time? It'll just make life easier. I won't have to spend my energy. So he literally owns like 40 versions of the same blue V-neck t-shirt. And he wears it, he mixes it up, whether it's khaki shorts, khaki pants, jeans, whatever, black jeans, whatever, depending on the weather. But you will see him most often in that blue V-neck shirt. Now, he said he does throw on sometimes like a button-up shirt or a whatever for church, his wife, or for a nice date, his wife will have him dress up a little bit. But as soon as he's able, he will take that thing off and put back on his blue t-shirt. Now, it has become part of his branding because in all of his book covers, you see him in that blue V-neck t-shirt. And anytime you see him, he's in that blue V-neck t-shirt. So it's actually kind of become part of his brand, but that is his life hack. Find that one thing, that one outfit that works for you, what I call as a stylist, your go-to uniform. And he rocks it every day. Now, as a wardrobe stylist, I don't know that I would ever personally recommend someone do this, but you know what? If your life is streamlined in such a way that you're like, I just don't want to put the energy into it, you know what? Go for it. Do what works for you because your clothes are there to serve you, not to enslave you. So that was his life hack, which just made me giggle when he shared that as like a serious suggestion. I was like, are we joking right now? He was like, no, I'm very serious. This has actually saved me a lot of energy. So that was his life hack. The blue V-neck t-shirt. So you guys make sure you check out his book, Learning to See. It's on Amazon and pretty much anywhere you can buy a book. It is a top bestseller. And so it's way up at the top of the charts. It's incredible. He shares in there more details of his story, as well as, again, like he said in the episode, it's the practicals of basically helping a photographer get started to build their business and do what they love to do and make it like an income. And so go check it out. Listen, thanks so much for joining me for this episode, you guys. And next week, you guys are going to want to come back because I have an interview with an author her name is Tiffany Yecke Brooks, and she wrote the book Gaslighted by God. And it's really about how to walk through when your faith becomes disillusioned, kind of like off of his story, when your faith is challenged and hurt and the formulas that you've been taught at church aren't working like they should, if you will, for life to work for you or God to move on your behalf. And what do you do when you've been praying for a healing and that healing doesn't come? What do you do when you've been praying for a child and you miscarry? What do you do when your faith is challenged so hard you feel like you've been gaslighted by God? She shares her story, and she's a PhD and is very, very knowledgeable and educated in this, and she's done tons of research. We had a great conversation, so great, we stretched it into 2 episodes. So that's the next 2 episodes. If you've ever been challenged in your faith or feeling like, why is this not working for me? What is wrong with me? There's nothing wrong with you. And we're going to help you understand that in this episode. So make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. Otherwise, go friend me on Instagram at Java with Jen. That's where I love to communicate with you guys. And go check out the merch store, javawithjenmerch.com. And otherwise, I'll see you next week.
Thanks so much for tuning in to today's show. Listen, let's stay connected. Come follow me on Instagram at Java with Jen, where you can follow the latest and say hey. It's a really great way to stay in touch. Many of you have also asked how you can support the show. You can make donations through the Anchor app or on Patreon, or of course by sharing, rating, and reviewing on social media and iTunes as well. Your heartfelt feedback always reminds me why I do this. Also, don't miss our merch store where you can get super cool Java with Jen swag and coffee. Find it at javawithjenmerch.com. Until next time, remember, hearing God's voice is simple, and He wants to be a part of your everyday life. See you next week.